When did it become a crime to love and serve God? How did obedience become sacrilege? Get away guilt, get lost shame. I gave my consent, but I broke no law. All I did was answer the call. I said, yes, Lord. I chose to obey God. But who will believe my innocence? These are thoughts whirling through the mind of a young virgin who went to bed normal and woke up pregnant. It wasn't featured in True Life Story magazine, but it was a frontline story of a Good News publication in Matthew. A young, beautiful girl, Mary by name, who loved God and was aspiring to serve Him in a marriage to a good man called Joseph. Yeah, they were engaged when she suddenly showed up not only pregnant, but with a weird tale that made no sense if it were ever told in fairyland. Anyway, back to the story. This beautiful girl was engaged to a gentleman that equally loved God no less. So this was supposed to be the model marriage. She had dreams for her life with Joseph, the kind of family they would build together. It may not have been any out of the ordinary dream, but it was a dream nonetheless. And it was fitting for the society they lived in at the time. That was until God stepped in, interrupted that dream, and changed the course of her life. According to the way Matthew reported the story in chapter 1 of all places, Mary was found to be with child before she was married. What? Whoa! Teenage pregnancy may be popular these days, but you can be sure that those days, in the culture wherein Mary was raised, it definitely was not cool. It was an abomination that carried a death sentence. Even in the culture I was raised, your family would lose face for a daughter who ended up with a bun in her oven outside of wedlock. Times have changed a lot compared to what it used to be. But let your teenage daughter, sister, or niece come home one day and tell you she is pregnant. And you may get a feel of the absurd pressure that singular news can raise in a normal heart. Do you think the neighborhood ever forgot the girl that got pregnant before she was wed? As if that wasn't bad enough, there's this spin of her acclaimed innocence. God got you pregnant? Really? Give us a break. How ridiculous is that? Would you believe it? If it is hardly believable today, then we can barely blame those who didn't buy the virgin birth story either. If it were today, photos of her would be trending on social media. Hashtag impregnated by God. Hashtag laughing out loud, rolling on the floor. Hashtag shaking my head. That young girl who sought nothing but to do the will of God became an embarrassment to her fiancé, her family, and in the society. Her sin? Obedience to God. She answered the call, where the angel showed up with the announcement of God's call for her life, was exactly where her own dreams ended. Question 1. What has God called you to? God knew the heart of this girl. He knew she would obey Him whatever the cost. Question 2. Can God say the same about you and me? Is God confident in our obedience, or do we obey only when it is convenient? Note these questions in your journal for deeper reflection. Anyway, Of all the women in town at that time, God chose to use Mary for such a critical assignment. Why? That girl had history with God. God knew that she would follow instructions and do His will despite the exorbitant cost. God knew she could handle the adverse consequences of her obedience. God was confident that this girl will keep the secret. Question 3. Can God trust you with a secret? With His secret? What will you do to prove your innocence in a situation like this? Can God boast that we will stand and not crack when the consequences of our obedience begin to play out to our disadvantage? That we will not blab out the incredible encounter even though nobody will believe us? If we go by the way things worked then, she was a good girl turned bad. But she didn't do it. God did. All she did was obey. She risked being stoned to death. That was the cost of her obedience. All she did was answer when God called. She said, "Do with me as you please." And God did just that, which wasn't very socially reasonable or politically correct. Why couldn't God find a married woman and save this innocent girl from shame? Because His ways are not our ways. We cannot choose how God operates in our life and in the world. Still, it will be enlightening to know what price we are willing to pay for our obedience. I'm definitely not Mary. Neither are the times the same. But believe me, I have been hammered a number of times for obeying God. I have feared and cried alone in the dark about people's reactions to my steps of obedience. I did not regret my actions, but I learned a number of lessons. 1, I learned to take responsibility for my obedience and not blame it on God. It is our choice to obey or not. God doesn't force us, so we can't blame Him for our choices or the consequences. 2, we have to learn to accept the blessings and also to face the unpleasant consequences without passing blames, whether to God or to any other person involved. 3, we have to learn not to accommodate guilt and regrets if we have done the right thing, to the best of our abilities. Guilt, shame, and regret are not from God and only complicates things for us. 4, we have to learn to trust God through the process and to wait for His vindication, because there are some battles that are not meant for us to fight. Some points that are not our responsibility to prove. And we make things messier when we dabble into things that only God can clear out for us. I recall in one church where I was in charge of a publication, someone decided to make my life miserable because I included scandalous conception, an article I wrote on this very subject on the church bulletin. How can the Holy Church be associated with such an outrageous idea? Yet that was Mary's case, if truth must be told. God's will for her didn't pan out the way she may have planned her life, yet she accepted it. God's path for her as a vessel for His work didn't go the route that is normal and acceptable, yet she embraced it. A few more questions for reflection. How have you handled instances when you sensed God leading you in ways that contradicted your dreams, your plans, and the norms? What are you learning from Mary's story, and how do you think it will help you going forward in your pursuit of God and His will for your life? What will you do if you sense God calling you in ways that are not socially acceptable and politically correct? Prepare your heart to follow God. We must be prepared to obey and prepared to obey at all cost. We must be prepared to go all the way with Him. Otherwise, we may turn back when the going gets tough. Check out the links and scriptures below for additional help. Feel free to share your thoughts and answers in the comment. Be inspired. You are a star, and it is your time to shine. Don't forget to subscribe and share this with family and friends. Join me in the next video on this series of Divine Interruption as we probe how God picks the chosen.